welcome everybody to our space. It is my great pleasure to introduce Richard Sexton to you tonight. Very recently, on March 29th, it was our great pleasure at the LEH to present Richard Sexton with the 2014 Michael P. Smith Memorial Award for Documentary Photography. We were thrilled and honored to recognize his contributions to documentary photography, especially as it relates to his work documenting New Orleans and Louisiana. In addition to his Louisiana Cultural Vistas publications, Richard's work has been published in such magazines as Archetype, Harper's, Photographer's Forum, and View Camera. His other books related to Louisiana include the best-selling New Orleans, Elegance and Decadence, Vestiges of Grandeur, The Plantations of Louisiana's River Road, Terra Incognita, Photographs of America's Third Coast, and Destrehan, The Man, the House, the Legacy. Richard's photographs are included in the collections of the New Orleans Museum of Art, the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, and the Historic New Orleans Collection, among many others. Richard is renowned for his photographs of architecture and environment of New Orleans and the Gulf South and the larger Caribbean and Latin American nations that share a common history and heritage. Richard's 13th book published is Creole World, Photographs of New Orleans and the Latin Caribbean Sphere. This book focuses on these international cross-cultural connections. Published by the Historic New Orleans collection in a couple of days, very soon. This book is features selections from Creole World are featured in the spring 2014 edition of Vistas, which you all have, and a related exhibition is due to open at the collection in the next week. So we are very honored to have had the pleasure of previewing for you this new book and his new work, and to have him here with us tonight to give you a little taste, an introduction for the whirlwind of activity that's about to begin surrounding his new book and exhibition at the New Orleans Collection. So please help me welcome Richard Sexton.
Well, as Miranda just told you, my feature's a little bit different than the other two in that it is an abridged version of a much larger project. We all know, I think, that old adage about New Orleans being the northernmost Caribbean city. And if I were merely telling you that again, I kind of need to get at the back of the line, because it's been observed many, many times by many, many different writers. The difference with my project is it's visual, it's photographic. I'm actually showing that New Orleans is a Caribbean city. And the project started in kind of an unusual way that really goes back all the way to 1974, when at the age of 19, I decided that I would drive a Datsun station wagon to South America. And leaving from South Georgia, the first stop on that mammoth trip was New Orleans. And it was at my insistence that two buddies I was traveling with wanted to make a beeline from Mexico, but I insisted we come to New Orleans for the weekend. And the trip would be a really transformative sort of adventure for me, because I drove all over, went to every country in Central America, left the car in the Canal Zone in Panama, and traveled overland all the way to Bolivia, and made it all the way back, and it was a 6-month adventure. And so that was really how this project began. And then in 1991, I moved from California to Louisiana, to New Orleans, and have lived here ever since. And I proudly tell everyone I am America's laziest expatriate, because I've only had to leave the country in spirit. I haven't actually had to physically go anywhere and put up with living out of the country, literally. But in spirit, I have. So in 2006, I returned to Latin America, really for the first time since I had done that monumental trip when I was in college. And that's what eventually sparked the idea that I wanted to do this project. And I wanted to do it because I was seeing all these things that were things that I had seen in New Orleans. And the photography that I began to do there, because I really learned to be a photographer by going to all these places in Latin America and photographing nonstop for 6 months. So I revisited that subject matter. Interestingly, on the 40th anniversary of that trip, Creole World, the book and the exhibit are, as Miranda indicated, it's all about to happen. In fact, they did 2 radio interviews today. They'll air later this week. So you'll be hearing a lot about it very, very soon. Here, I'll show you, I brought a couple of copies, which you're welcome to look at after for any of those of you who have the humor to stay on. Here's the book. It's Cuba on the cover. Trinidad, a town that's very, very near Cienfuegos, which is a place that maybe you don't know about, but some people do. Cienfuegos is a town founded by people from Louisiana who left after the purchase to escape American rule. They got a land grant in sugar country in Cuba. And there were also many people from Bordeaux. Clouet, who served in Louisiana, who was serving the Spanish crown, this was during the Spanish period, he was the leader of the group. So there was always a Louisiana connection, although in Cuba, Cienfuegos is known as the French town. So there are lots of little things like that in Creole World. All these various connections between New Orleans and the other places that I photographed: Cuba, Haiti, Panama, Colombia, and many others. I won't list them all, but it's a really broad look at the Creole world. And I'll say this, Creole, the notion of it, really when I was looking at all these similarities between New Orleans and these other places, I needed a thematic way to bring all this together. And I ultimately decided that the common denominator between all these places was this notion of Creole. And in Spanish it's criollo, and that's the original word which the French appropriated and which is used throughout Louisiana. And it's one of these words, unfortunately, that as soon as you begin talking about it and go to define it, you get in an argument pretty quickly. And you really get in an argument once you include its uses in places like Cuba and Haiti, where it means completely different things. There's a common thread between all of it, but there's a lot of regional variation of meaning with this word. And part of the book, and there's a wonderful essay that Jay Edwards, who I really think is one of the best Creole scholars in Louisiana, and his essay is devoted entirely to this notion of Creole. What was its ancient meaning? How has it evolved? How did it came to represent language? For instance, in Haiti, when you're talking Creole, they're mostly using it because that's the language that they speak. It's a pidgin French, phonetically spelled. They spell Creole, K-R-E-Y-O-L. And in Criollo, the Spanish use is also very different. It's almost never used, in fact, I've never heard it in reference to a person's ethnicity. They have a lot of other words for that, many of which are appropriated into English, because it was a cultural phenomenon that in Spanish and Latin culture was acknowledged and it's kind of suppressed in Anglo-Protestant culture. So that's all a part of what this project is about. It is about this broad notion of the Creole world and linking New Orleans. And I really restricted it to New Orleans and not all of South Louisiana just because I would have had to have done an encyclopedic volume if you were to get into all of it. So I really did restrict it to New Orleans just for that reason, so that I could fit it all in one book. To talk a little bit about the Cultural Vistas feature, it's done a little bit differently than the book. I think that the lead photograph, which is from Cap-Haïtien, which is a place very much like New Orleans. And to me, really, when I look at Cap-Haïtien today, I'm seeing the French Quarter as it was, as I've seen it in photographs from the early 1900s. And if you think about Francis Benjamin Johnston and Arnold Genta photographs of the French Quarter from that time, Cap-Haïtien is much more like that today. But apart from the street activity itself, when you look at that opening photograph, the double-page spread that starts the feature, you really see an urban environment that could easily be the French Quarter, with buildings that you recognize as French colonial buildings and so forth. And from that point, really the Cultural Vistas feature is all about pairings. It's about a photograph from New Orleans paired with somewhere else in the Creole world. And you see the similarity. The Madonnas, one from Caffin Avenue in the lower Ninth Ward, the other from a botanical shop in Cap-Haïtien, purveying the kinds of goods that you just heard described earlier. That kind of thing. And there's so many things. For instance, in the two photographs, there's one of Cartagena, and by the way, the church, there are two prominent churches, and those overall views, of which there are more in the book, but for the Cultural Vistas feature, there are two. One's Cartagena, and it's in that church that San Pedro Claver, what they know as San Pedro Claver, who's known as Peter Claver in New Orleans, that's where he's buried. His body is in state, as it has been. He operated out of Cartagena, and he's a very important figure in the Creole community. But I really wanted to show in those pictures the fundamental element of every Latin town. And there's no variation here. In the center of town, there's a plaza. The grandest edifice on the plaza is the Catholic Church. Just like in New Orleans, Jackson Square, and you have the Catholic Church. Government buildings may be hard to find, but you can't miss the church. And that's really a defining characteristic of every Latin town, and you certainly see that in New Orleans. So those kinds of things were some of the things that I focused on. So I'll be very brief. You know, when you go last, sometimes brevity can be your best attribute. So, because in just a week, the exhibit will hang. It's going to be in a Spanish building at the corner of Conti and Charters, which is a relatively new building for the collection. And for those Quarterites amongst us, you might remember the Tally Ho, where I had many breakfasts shared with some people who had not been to bed yet, and was a favorite spot to get breakfast in the Quarter. And that is one of the gallery rooms where Creole World would be on display, so that's quite fitting. And the book will also be available in a week as well, and you'll be hearing lots more about it. And there's an opening on the 22nd of April, 6:30 to 8 in the evening. That's a Tuesday before Jazz Fest, and I hope all of you can make it. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.